So I want to welcome all of you to Talk and Taste. My name is Sadia, and this is Anthony. Will be your moderators for tonight. This is our fourth public debate. Whether you've been with us from the very beginning or just joining us tonight, I want to thank all of you guys for making it out here tonight. And also thank you to the bench for hosting this event. Thank you for all the woos, yeah. So while this is structured like a debate, again, the intent of these discussions is really to show the nuances in some of the most divisive conversations in culture today. Things are never black and white and very complicated, so it makes these conversations all the more important. Which brings me to today's topic, pornography. So pornography it's not new to this world. 35,000 years ago, archaeologists found carved figurines of women in Germany to elicit sexual arousal, which could say something about the Germans. But today, porn is everywhere. Researchers found that 35% of all internet downloads are estimated to be pornography related. We've also seen the rise of OnlyFans, which has renewed conversation around compulsive use and how we interact with each other. Like any industry that's lived through a tech boom, access has expanded dramatically, and that expansion invites a genuine question. Should we, as a society, how do we respond?
So one template for response could be, as an example, the Controlled Substances Act. The United States passed this in 1970. It was a framework which evaluated substances on their harm and benefit. Some were regulated, some were banned, others were permitted. The underlying logic was very simple. These things exist, people engage with them. So the question becomes, where do they fall on the gradient from benefit to harm? Tonight, that is our starting point. Is the pornography industry, this is the question we will be focusing on, is the pornography industry as it currently operates a net harm, something that warrants serious restriction or restructuring, or is it a net good, a legitimate space of labor, expression, and freedom that deserves protection?
Well, so before we invite our esteemed guests to talk through the different sides, we actually want to get a pulse check of how this room feels about this question. Is porn net good or net bad for society? So we're going to open it up to a poll. So we're going to, if it can activate, that would be great. Hold on. Why is it not activating? Is it not working? Give me a sec. Maybe why is it not working? Let me do my laptop. Oh. It doesn't want us to answer. Too much porn.
It's
okay,
activated.
It's activated. Okay. You guys use this QR code. 1 being it's the absolute best, and 5 being the bubonic plague. Oh.
30 seconds for voting.
30 seconds for voting. Wow, a lot of 4s here. Got 20 seconds. I think all the votes are in.
Are all the votes in? Anyone struggling?
Okay, we've got a very Puritan crowd over here tonight. Okay. Well, knowing that we stand on a rating of 4, I think we're going to start introducing our lovely guests. We have Noelle Perdue. Noelle is a writer. Give it up for Noelle. Woo! She is a writer, producer, and internet porn historian. She spent a decade working inside the adult industry at Pornhub, major studios, as a scriptwriter with her contributions at Brazzers, and became one of the most rigorous thinkers on porn's relationship to technology, law, and culture. Her work has appeared on Wired, Washington Post, Slate. She was also a key voice in Netflix's documentary Money Shot. She runs the Porn World newsletter on Substack. Thank you so much, Noelle, for today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We also have Meghan Murphy. She is a writer and the host of The Same Drugs. She has been a fierce advocate for free speech and women's rights for many years, and is well known for challenging gender identity ideology and the sex industry. Meghan has appeared on a wide range of high-profile media networks, including BBC, Fox News, and the Joe Rogan Experience. You can find her writing in The Times, The Spectator, Spiked, and she will be speaking in opposition of the industry. Thank you, Meghan, for joining us. All right, so before we begin, some boring stuff, some housekeeping. Today is gonna go something like this. We will spend 10 minutes, 5 minutes each speaker with introducing themselves, opening statements. 40 minutes will be between me and Anthony moderating the debate with some specific questions to each speaker. And then 20 minutes from the audience, and then we will do a closing argument for both sides, and then we'll do another vote to see if anyone has changed their minds. The questions will be focused on three things: supply, so how does porn today affect sex workers? The demand, porn's effect on consumers, and just the general vibe of porn's effect on society. I will give you guys each a time, and then we'll have this handy dandy tool to tell you when there is a minute left on the clock. And you guys are welcome. There's a bar over there, so if you guys want to get up and grab some drinks, feel free. Also, bathroom is behind Meghan to the right. All right, you guys ready? All right, so let's open up the floor. So I'm gonna start my timer. We're gonna start with Noelle. Noelle, do you think the porn industry, a net good for society and worth protecting? And
I think I'm going to answer this as it was written, which is porn a net good?
Yes.
Is porn a net good? I'm specifying because the porn industry is such a vague term that is extremely difficult to actually define because of how pornography operates, because of how difficult to define pornography is at large. The kind of cottage industries within pornography themselves are difficult to define. So I'm going to talk about porn. I like porn. I'm coming at this from a place of being biased for pornography because I like it. I like to watch it. I think it's fun. Obviously, my background is in the porn industry. I started doing porn script writing, mostly parody pornography, and when I was writing parody pornography for Brazzers, it was funny. There was a team of maybe 6 of us, and everybody else went to film school, and I was there because I like porn. And I wanted to write porn. I didn't want to write movies. And I like porn because it is this extremely kind of broad way that you can explore an idea, whether it be sexual or not. You know, when I was writing parody porn, I had a blast because people are really willing to suspend their disbelief if they think at some point somebody's gonna get naked. You can make a lot of really dumb jokes. You can get away with just stringing several dick jokes together, putting a cum shot at the end. I had a blast. So I like porn. Now, you know, it's been about 5 years since I have left, you know, the porn industry as people might define it. Now I work in mainstream media, but I still get invited to things, you know, like the Berlin Porn Film Festival where I was a judge, and I liked watching porn. I like watching all the ways that people define pornography for themselves, for their practice, etc. So I like it. But politically speaking, and this is, where my career has gone in the last 5 years since leaving the porn industry as arguably it would be defined. I've been talking about pornography history and its influence on legislation and culture, and I have become way more passionate about porn and its right to exist and how we should be defending pornography, because pornography, as I've researched, is the single most significant catalyst to censorship on freedom of speech, freedom of expression. One thing I'm really interested in talking to you about, Meghan, hello, nice laptop, is specifically how you can kind of reckon identifying as a free speech advocate and your belief in pornography and that it should be regulated at a government level, banned even, et cetera. You're very anti-pornography openly. Because for me, I look back at all of these major moments in legislation, in American legislation, and pornography is a catalyst. The term pornography and its relationship to the more legislatively high stakes term obscenity is famously ill-defined and has always been used as a weapon against, for example, marginalized identities, marginalized relationships. In 1957, the ruling Roth versus United States changed how we define obscenity. Roth versus United States was famously catalyzed by Roth distributing erotic material. And in the year after that ruling, that 1957 ruling, Memphis, for example, banned 3 films, and all depicted interracial relationships. And this is just an example of how pornography, the term pornography, as it's applied, has so much more to do with respectability politics than it does anything that you can kind of figure out in a dictionary definition. More recently, 2023, Texas drag bans used anti-obscenity law to put forth legislation that was initially, a bill that was initially ruled unconstitutional. So this is, what we're going to talk about, ideally, is how anti-pornography rhetoric actually gets applied. And in every case, it is a fundamental overstep in our rights and freedoms of expression. So that is why I defend pornography.
Woo! All right. Meghan, why do you think porn is net bad?
First of all, thanks everyone for coming. Thanks everyone for coming to the Battle of the Redheads. The debate around pornography has always sort of struck me as insincere, not only in terms of the whether or not it's good or bad, but also the question of whether or not it should be banned. I don't think it's possible to ban pornography. I don't think it's possible to get rid of pornography entirely. I think it's possible to curb consumption and to discourage production, exploitation, and abuse. I hope that we all know that the sex industry rests so much on trafficking, exploitation, the abuse of women and children. And one good way to curb that kind of exploitation, to curb trafficking, to curb that particular kind of abuse that's vast and global is by, trying to curb the porn industry. So I can talk more about the legalities of that later in the conversation. We tend to talk a lot about the question of choice, and in particular women's choice. Should women be free to produce pornography? Should women be free to do what they want with their bodies? We very, very rarely talk about men's choice to consume. And again, we all know that most porn is consumed mostly by men. Yes, some women consume pornography. The vast majority of pornography is consumed by men, and yet we seem to ignore these choices and pretend this is a question of feminism, empowerment, women's liberation. The third aspect that I tend to find insincere about the pornography debate is the free speech aspect. Pornography isn't speech, it's not words, it's not written, they're human bodies, they're human women, they're human girls, they're human men. These are real people doing real sex acts. So I see pornography really as akin to prostitution. People are being paid to do sex acts, and I think that we can think about legalizing around pornography in those terms. Personally, I've always found porn disgusting. I never really understood defenses of it. I grew up before the internet, and I still remember seeing pornography in magazines for the first time and being repulsed, not turned on. So there was never like a titillation factor to me. I was never interested in looking at other people's genitalia, the insides of their assholes. It doesn't appeal to me. So, you know, that feeling stuck around even as I got older. I enjoy sex. I'm heterosexual. I enjoy having sex with specific people. It's not an anti-sex position from my perspective. And actually, I think that, you know, opposition to pornography and criticisms of pornography are very pro-sex, because I think that pornography is really dehumanizing. I think that a lot of it, you know, and again, most of it is about humiliation and degradation of women, which I don't personally find sexy. A lot of it is violent, a lot of it is abusive, a lot of it is exploitative. And it's really anti-intimacy. It's anti-human. It's not concerned with female pleasure specifically. It's not concerned with connection. So I don't even really see it as very sexy or very much about sexuality. I certainly don't see it as pro-sexuality. I remember when I was completing a women's studies degree, I did complete more than one women's studies degree. Back in the early aughts, it was at sort of peak third wave feminism. So we were talking a lot about sex positive feminism, you know, not shaming people. This like pornography can be an empowering feminist choice thing. And we were tasked with doing these group projects, and we were supposed to take a position for or against pornography. So the group that I was in took an anti-pornography position, and we did research by going to a video store and renting porn videos, which was a thing at the time. And those were like really tame videos as compared to what you see on the internet nowadays. And they were so disturbing to me nonetheless. And so I often think about that oft-repeated quote that we hear from the 60s, I think it was, from US Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, who said, "I know when I see it." Like, we all do know what pornography is. We know it when we see it. We can pretend that it's about words or erotic novels, or are you against nudity? Are you against sex? No, it's specifically pornography, and we know what pornography is. And you know, I think that oh, sorry, what does that mean again? How many, am I like out? Am I done? 5 minutes?
We're done
Okay.
at 5. We are at 5 minutes.
But do I have like how many more?
You have 0.
0 minutes. Okay, got it.
0
Am I
minutes,
done?
Megan.
Okay, well, I'll get to the rest of my rambling later in the conversation. Thanks.
All right. Moderator questions. Next round. So this is going to be 40 minutes. You guys will have 3 minutes each, both to respond to the question, but also to respond to the question. So the first one is around OnlyFans. So platforms like OnlyFans have changed who produces porn, how it's distributed, and how people think about agency and labor. Start with Meghan. OnlyFans has given women more control, more profit, and people are actually paying for porn, where previously, you could pretty much get it for free. Agents are not part of the picture anymore. So why wouldn't this make OnlyFans a mechanism of liberation for women? You have 3 minutes.
I mean, OnlyFans has definitely normalized pornography, which I see as a net harm. So I don't think that just because you're getting paid to do a thing, or just because you're making money off of a thing, it makes it a positive thing. I think that's often what the argument is in favor of OnlyFans. Well, these women are like making bank, but you know, so you're making money doing something that's unethical. And you can pretend that it's just a personal choice, but it's not a personal choice if you're putting this out into the world. You're selling a product. You're also making money for OnlyFans. The women on OnlyFans they get money if they recruit girls. So a lot of the women who are really big on OnlyFans, which are a tiny, tiny minority of the women who are producing on OnlyFans, those women get paid if they bring girls on. So they're advocating for these girls to come on, join OnlyFans, where they're unlikely to make very much money at all. I think what most chicks on there make on average is like $70 a month. There's very few women who are making, tens of thousands of dollars or more. And so at the end of the day, you're contributing to this larger system and to this platform that, again, is part of the pornography industry as a whole. Like, I don't really respect this attempt to individualize pornography and just make it about a personal choice. If you want to make pornography and give it to somebody, knock yourself out. You can film yourself doing whatever you want in your house. You can take photos of yourself. You can send them to whoever. But you're using these platforms. You're putting them out onto, Pornhub, Twitter, Instagram, OnlyFans, and selling it, normalizing it. And you're also tasked with bringing on your own customers, which means that these girls are using platforms like Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, etc., to bring men and boys over to pay them for subscriptions, which is why we see all of this pornography all over social media platforms where there are minors, which I don't know, none of these people seem to really care about. It seems like we're comfortable having this conversation where we say, oh yeah, of course children shouldn't be watching pornography. Of course minors shouldn't be exposed to pornography. But minors are being exposed to pornography from a very, very young age now. Because it's all over social media. It's impossible to avoid pornography. It's impossible in this day and age to grow up and not be exposed to pornography. And I don't think that we're really taking that very seriously at all. And as far as the women and their personal choices, you can't take that back. And there are lots of choices that I made when I was 18, 19, 20 years old that I regret, but those choices are not on the internet forever. So yeah, I think that trying to turn this into just like a one-time choice and whatever they did it, they made their choice, is really limiting in terms of the scope of the problem and the impact on the women and girls and society as a whole.
Time. Noelle, your response?
I mean, I don't support OnlyFans. I don't like OnlyFans as a platform. They threatened to remove all adult content from their site in 2022, which I found just ridiculous, because obviously they made millions and millions of dollars off of people selling adult content, and I think that that's disingenuous. I also, I struggle, I would say similar to you, Megan, I actually struggle with some of the marketing tactics that OnlyFans has, let's use the word normalized. But I think what frustrates me in this conversation that I have pretty frequently with people saying, these OnlyFans girls are marketing themselves on Instagram. These pornography is hitting Instagram. Everything is porn now. Everyone's trying to sell porn. There's no inquiry into why that might be. This idea that pornography just exists in a vacuum and it is just, something that isn't influenced by anything else in the whole world, and not for a second should we think, why are so many people turning to something that they have been told will make them money, it will make them money quickly, and they have to kind of give it their all. Why are so many of these 18-year-olds, which I also disagree with, joining OnlyFans? I don't think that that's appropriate. Personally, as somebody that likes pornography, I don't think anybody should be joining OnlyFans at 18. You can quote me on that. But we are living in a world where people are so scared about their income. They are so scared of entering an economy that is continually crumbling, that they are more than ever joining the adult industry. And I think that that's something that should be looked at, not as sort of like some fundamental evil of pornography, but as something that should be a wider inquiry. And I struggle with a lot of this rhetoric around porn, where it just the inquiry or the criticism just stops at porn. You know, why do you think this is happening?
So that's an interesting response, actually. We're going to skip around a little to a different question that we were going to ask. The point you're making, as I understand it, is that people have requirements. They need to make money in a system that we live in, and so they find themselves making money on OnlyFans. OnlyFans, we can criticize it or whatever, but the point I think that some people might make is that men have these desires, primarily men, women too, but primarily men have these desires to see people having sex on camera. At the end of the day, what pornography usually is mostly women being paid to engage in sex acts in front of that camera to cater to those male desires. So we can talk about choice, we can talk about regulating this or that, but aren't we setting up a system where, by the logic of it, women are going to engage in OnlyFans and other things that we might dislike or might criticize, but that's the logic of the system that we're going towards.
Can you read out exactly how that question is written for the audience?
Sure. I mean, so the original question is, I was trying to tie it to what you just said.
No, I appreciate it, but I think it's relevant.
Most of the consumers of porn are men. At the end of the day, women are going to be paid to engage in sexual acts that cater to male desires. We can talk about female choice all we want, but aren't women making choices in a structure that is not of their own making?
Aren't women making choices in a structure that isn't of their own making? That's a great way to put it. And obviously, yeah. I'm going to actually ask a question to the audience. How many people feel like they are working in a structure, in our larger economic structure, that is of their own making? Show of hands. 1, 2. Hesitantly 3. 4 people. How many people do we think are in this room? 100? So I think that answers the question, but I can talk more about it. So out of everybody that did not raise their hands, that feels as though they are making choices in a structure that is not of their own making, how many of you believe that is the fault of pornography? Genuinely. None. Okay, none. I think that's my answer.
Meghan, your response?
I'm sort of lost on what we're talking about now. So, like, is the question of, are we talking about this idea that, okay, well, we all live under capitalism, so we all have to make money somehow?
I think that's so. Let's define it, actually. I think that blaming specifically porn, the medium of pornography, for these larger structural issues and the sort of end game of you want some form of legislative process to manage that. Is that correct?
So, to be clear, what I would advocate in terms of legislating around pornography would be something similar to what is called the Nordic model, which they instituted in Sweden in 1999 to address problem of trafficking, so to address the sex industry as a whole, specifically prostitution. And what it did was it criminalized pimps, johns, traffickers, brothel owners, decriminalized the women. And the purpose was to curb trafficking, to curb the sex trade. So there's less incentive. It's much harder to profit if it's illegal to profit from pornography. But we all know that prostitution is not going to disappear entirely, just as pornography is not going to disappear entirely. Again, the best we can do is to try to curb this really toxic, abusive, exploitative industry. So what happened is that, it curbed trafficking to a huge extent in Sweden. It was very successful. And the women who are, selling sex are in a position of power, in fact, because the men, I know that you guys pretend that that's not true, but it is true.
There are so many studies again that show that it's not true.
So they're in a position where the John is already doing something wrong. So, for example, if the John, does something abusive, does something violent, tries to not pay her, he's already doing something illegal. She can call a cop. She's not going to get into trouble. So I think that's a good system for the women involved. And yeah, I think that in general we should just making it a lot harder to produce and make money off pornography. If these guys weren't making money off pornography, if OnlyFans wasn't making money off pornography, if Pornhub wasn't making money off pornography, obviously there would be much less pornography. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of legalities. The reason that we're talking about porn as a specific problem is because the debate is about porn, and porn is a specific problem. We're not having a debate about capitalism as a system, I don't think.
Look, you're talking to the wrong girl if you want to make that argument. But let's talk about the Nordic model. So you want to criminalize the consumption of pornography. That's what the Nordic model application would be.
I would be more inclined specifically with the porn industry to criminalize people profiting off of the porn industry and paying somebody to perform sex acts. So you hire somebody to perform a specific sex act to film it and sell it.
So you would criminalize making custom content.
Making custom content, like on a platform like OnlyFans, yeah. I mean, the OnlyFans platform would be illegal. But if you, as an individual, want to make pornography and give it to somebody, go ahead. If you want to profit from it, I think that would be a different question.
But that would criminalize the individuals. Like it that doesn't really work with pornography because you're saying that, under the Nordic model, this is not true, by the way. Obviously, I've been in community with sex workers for a long time, and sex work community are hugely against the Nordic model for reasons such as the application of the Nordic model. For example, if two women are sharing a hotel room, many cases, both women are arrested and charged as brothel owners for the other. That has happened a number of times, also in Canada, where we're both from. So just to say, the Nordic model, look it up afterwards, that is not a beacon of hope for the sex industry, certainly.
Well,
and
hopefully
I'm not done.
Hopefully it's
I'm
the
actually not
opposite
done.
of a beacon of hope for the sex industry.
In the application, on the application of pornography, you are saying that people who are making porn, and this is an issue with the adult industry, is that it's hugely difficult, for example, to unionize in the adult industry because everybody's an independent contractor. So you're saying that independent contractors, the women who are making pornography, would be criminalized for profiting off of pornography. So it doesn't really apply.
Well, I mean, I'm not here to save the porn industry, but obviously I don't want women who are being exploited and abused to go to jail. So that's my concern with decriminalizing the women who are selling sex, for example.
But you're advocating
I
for
mean,
them
it works
to go
as
to
a law,
jail.
and it does work as a law in Sweden. Like the individual woman, if you're selling sex as an escort, you're not going to get thrown in jail for selling sex. That's what the law is.
Which I agree with, but sex workers generally advocate for a full decrim, not the Nordic model.
Yes, and I disagree with them.
I know that, but let's not pretend that you're an advocate for sex workers.
I've never pretended that.
Okay.
Glad
we got that clear.
We're going to ask one of our structured questions on the basis of this. We will let you guys rip if you want to.
Yeah.
Somebody else? We're going to ask one of our questions. If you guys are getting into a back and forth and it's productive, we'll let you guys go. But governments are increasingly stepping in to regulate the industry, driven by concerns about who has access to explicit content online and under what conditions. Just to give some context, Project 2025 has unleashed renewed fervor to regulate, if not ban, pornography. Senator Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, proposed a bill that would expand the definition of obscenity and effectively criminalize porn. Currently, over 20 states have passed age verification laws requiring users to prove they are adults accessing certain sites. So this one for Meghan. Civil rights lawyers have often treated pornography as a canary in the coal mine for free expression. Noelle has made that argument tonight as well. What is permissible in porn is very subjective. Some content on these platforms are not even sexually explicit, but a form of erotica. Is it even possible to distinguish what is acceptable or unacceptable pornography without opening up a Pandora's box of outright censorship?
I do think that's an important question because I am concerned with censorship. Again, I don't think that free speech laws should be applied to the porn industry. I don't think that prostitution is speech. I don't think that pornography is speech. I don't think that selling sex acts to men is speech. Again, I think we do know what pornography is. I'm not opposed to erotica as it's written in books, but I am opposed to women being exploited and abused and people profiting off of that exploitation and abuse so that men can masturbate to those images or, you know, use their bodies for sex or whatever. So I would prefer to separate pornography and the sex trade from the question of free speech and free expression and get into the nitty-gritty of what's acceptable and what's not within the courts. I think that the age verification question is really important, and I'm glad that we've been addressing that, at least in America. And you know, the problem of minors accessing pornography is huge, and I think that beyond that, if there is a system of age verification to access pornography sites, it really curbs use, because a lot of men don't want to put their ID into these like forms when they're using pornography. So I think that it would be good in terms of curbing consumption as well.
I know, Noelle, you're extremely passionate about this particular topic, so I'll give you 3 minutes to respond.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've raised already how trying to separate pornography from arguments around free expression is ridiculous. I think that it's like, you know, you're making the argument that we shouldn't apply kind of general unrealistic things like destroying capitalism to the argument of pornography, and that's fine. I, in response then, say that it's totally unrealistic to just sort of blue sky dream a reality where freedom of expression, freedom of speech is not linked to pornography and obscenity law. I think I want to bring something up that you actually did a little while ago. You collaborated with Exodus Cry, correct? You were on their podcast. I spoke out against porn as a feminist.
Oh, they
and
interviewed me on their podcast. Yeah,
yes, yeah.
Great.
How do you feel about Exodus Cry? I'm curious.
I know Benjamin, who was the founder of Exodus Cry, and I like him, but, you know, I'm an independent podcaster and writer, so I interview people. I go on all sorts of podcasts. I support their work generally, yeah.
Yeah, I think
It doesn't mean that I sign on to every single thing that they believe and advocate. I'm not religious at all. I'm also not anti-religion.
Right. Exodus Cry is a far-right fundamentalist Christian organization, just so everybody knows that. And Exodus
Canceled.
Cry, they
Don't listen to anything they say from here on out.
Okay. You good? So Exodus Cry, I would say that you are certainly more on the side of Exodus Cry than me, though.
Yeah, I support their work. I
absolutely.
think they do good work.
You support their work.
For sure.
You think they do good work. That's wonderful. So for everybody's reference, Exodus Cry, I thought it was so interesting and funny when you were talking about, you brought up I Know It When I See It, Justice Potter Stewart, and you said, well, of course, everyone knows it, and you reference, I think you're thinking of a very specific kind of mainstream heterosexual pornography when you talk about that. Exodus Cry lists Swimsuit Illustrated as pornography. So you're in company with people that don't necessarily disagree with that, and I think that that's exactly what we're talking about, where the definition of pornography is so broad that for people in your camp, it is applied to something like Swimsuit Illustrated, which I'm assuming you don't agree with.
I don't think that they're advocating against Swimsuit Illustrated specifically. No, I don't think that's true.
I mean, it is. You can look it up. Everyone can look it
That
up.
they're
afterwards.
trying to ban Swimsuit Illustrated?
No, but that they have defined openly and in their publications that Swimsuit Illustrated counts as pornography.
I think it's very interesting to try to make the argument that because some little thing that you found somewhere on Exodus Cry's website that I'm unaware of, that means that I'm signing on to whatever that opinion or view is,
I don't think
which
that
I'm
you're
still
signing it
unaware
on.
of.
I'm specifically
So
saying that
why
I don't
you
think
say
you
what
are.
your views are, and I'll say what my views are, and then we'll talk about those views.
I don't think that you're agreeing. I'm saying that your belief that pornography is only applied to a very specific subsection of pornography is illogical and has no basis into the reality of how anti-pornography legislation is applied. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, again, I actually do think that everybody knows what pornography is, and if you look on the internet and you see the inside of a woman's body or you see her being penetrated by a penis, you can say, this is pornography. Like, she's being paid to do a sex act, it's being filmed,
What
it's
about
being
gay
sold,
porn?
somebody's profiting from it,
But
she's
what about
being
gay
paid
porn?
for it. What about what?
What about gay porn?
I mean, I don't really care that much about gay porn, to be honest, but it would apply to all pornography.
You don't care about gay porn?
No, I mean specifically, you know that gay porn counts as porn. I know that gay porn counts as porn.
But you don't care about gay porn.
I'm talking about, no, my point in saying that is more that I'm concerned with exploitation of women and girls and children in pornography and how to curb that. How to curb the abuse, exploitation, and trafficking of women and girls and children in pornography.
But not
I am
gay
opposed to
porn.
pornography as a whole, yes. I mean that personally my concern and what I write about and what I advocate for, I don't address gay pornography specifically.
Yeah,
But yes,
because it
of
doesn't
course it's
apply
pornography.
to
We
your
all know
rhetoric.
that. What's the joke? You don't know that that's porn? We all don't know that that's porn?
We're going to move on to the next question, but I appreciate the passion. This one's for Noelle. So the American Institute for Boys and Men in 2025, the Research Landscape Review found that the average age when first exposed to porn is 12. That's way younger than the previous generation.
Are you sure?
That is correct, yes.
Because I was a peer reviewer on that study.
Well, please critique me.
Okay. I think that you might be confusing two studies.
Go ahead.
I was a peer reviewer on this report from American Institute of Boys and Men. This is an organization I work with. And there is one study that says that the average age of first exposure to pornography in the United States is 12. Internationally, it's 13, for reference. And rates of pornography consumption in young people have increased. Both of those things are true. So, you know, I'm sure in some way that's true. Just I think that one of the issues with that study, that kind of collection of studies overview generally, is that it references a lot of material that spans from like late 90s to 2024, and obviously so much has happened in pornography in that period. So for example, you know, exposure to something like a Playboy magazine pretty young was very common. There's like a whole culture, a lot of conversation and study around the practice that used to be common of leaving porn magazines in the woods for people to find. Say nothing towards that. But generally speaking, I don't think that young people should be consuming pornography. I think we can agree with that on that. I think that people's concerns over young people being exposed to porn are fair. I think that nobody, at least I know in the porn industry, wants young people to be consuming their content. It is a major point of discussion within the adult industry. I think that where it gets messy is that a lot of people, you know, assume that it is sort of the responsibility of the porn industry to manage that. And I think it's the conversation of, should there exist places on the internet that are for adults? I think there should be. I think that there are ways to enact age verification that do not infringe on people's fundamental freedoms. I'm against uploading identification to porn sites. I think that that's a major overstep. Already we've seen so much in terms of data breach. There are, third-party sites that scan your face, that collect your bio data. There have already been breaches on that. I find that really concerning. I am much more in support of something like device-based age verification, which is kind of not the direction things are going. And again, this rhetoric around age verification and installing these data tracking systems are really upheld by anti-porn rhetoric. And I also think that the conversation around education around pornography is huge. And generally speaking, when we're talking about, for example, making it, like criminalizing people for selling porn, for example, I think that creates this and promotes this idea of shame around pornography that really goes against what I believe in, which is education around pornography. Interestingly, in that same overview, it shows that younger than medium exposure to pornography is harmful towards somebody's sexual development. And it also shows that later than normal exposure to pornography is harmful to people's sexual development, which is very confusing, obviously. And I think that really suggests a lack of information around pornography and a lack of real conversation about porn that I think really is rooted in fear-mongering and shame around porn. Thank you.
Meghan, your response?
Well, I think that people should feel ashamed for watching pornography. I also think, I think you've been watching pornography, or you were first exposed when you were 11, and clearly it has shaped your interests and sexualities in a very serious fashion. I also want to point out that, it was discovered there were like hundreds, thousands of videos of girls being raped, of victims of trafficking, of sexual abuse videos on Pornhub. Pornhub knew all those videos were there. They didn't do anything about it. They made money off of those videos. There were ads running on those videos. Pornhub is owned by MindGeek, which is the company you worked for many years, so I'm sure you were aware of those videos.
For Pornhub.
These companies are well aware of what's happening on their websites, and they don't do fuck all about it because they make money off of it. They're not concerned with ethics. They're not concerned with abuse. They're not concerned with age. They're not concerned with exploitation. They're concerned with making money. And everyone who works in the porn industry is aware of all of this, and they also don't care, obviously, because otherwise they wouldn't participate in this industry and work for these companies.
I, for reference, publicly quit Pornhub. So before everything was verified, before the scandal with Access Cry, I very publicly quit Pornhub.
But you watched pornography that was on Pornhub over and over and over and over again, day in and day out. Surely you saw some videos that were like this. Or you watched these videos, which happens to a lot of people who are consuming pornography, and you didn't know either way, which is a huge problem with pornography. You don't know what you're watching. You don't know if that girl's been trafficked. You don't know if she's being abused. You don't know if she's consenting. You don't know how old she is. You don't know if she's on drugs. You don't know if she has a long history of sexual abuse and molestation, which she probably does, because if you listen to any of these women talk about their histories, they all do. All of them. I've never heard of or spoken with a woman who's in prostitution or pornography who doesn't have a long history of molestation and sexual abuse. You really have no idea. So I don't think that there's any real way to consume pornography in an ethical fashion.
I'm going to respond to that. That's a huge accusation. Do you know what I did at Pornhub?
Yeah.
What did I do?
But you, in an interview for the CBC, said that the first day on your job, they put you in a cubicle and made you watch a bunch of porn.
I was First of all, I was
So I
working
was
for
saying what
Brazzers.
you said. I listened to the interview.
Okay, not very closely because I started at Brazzers, which is a studio, not an upload platform. And anyway, we could get into studio versus upload, but I don't think that's very useful. But when I worked at Pornhub, my job was to talk to people in the adult industry about Pornhub. And for about a year, I was advocating on behalf of verification. So when I started at Pornhub, it was a completely unverified platform, which means it hosted pretty much anything that people would upload. So it would host a lot of really disgusting content, both non-consensual and also pirated, stolen, etc., which is another form of non-consent. And I really disagreed with that. And for about a year, I was in a very frustrating kind of endless rigmarole of meetings of them, because I would have conversations with the adult industry, and many people in the adult industry did not want to be associated with Pornhub because they were not verified. It wasn't a verified platform. So you're wrong. A lot of people, actually a huge majority, and it is kind of heartbreaking to hear that because of how many people think about this all the time. Obviously, you've never been to an adult industry conference, but this is pretty much what we talk about. And at the time, I was having these conversations with people who were like, I don't feel comfortable uploading to Pornhub because of how much is unverified. And so I was having these conversations with Pornhub, and they were like, yeah, like, next week we're going to verify, or like, we're working on it. It's just like a really long process. And eventually I got frustrated with that and I quit. And 2 weeks later, the Nicholas Kristof piece came out about Pornhub, kind of exposing specifically this one studio that was uploading to Pornhub called Girls Do Porn, that was hugely human trafficking. It was a very extensive article. I have some issues with the article itself, but it's not really relevant to this conversation. And then, overnight, pretty much, Pornhub was fully verified. And that's really annoying. And now it is a fully verified platform, and has been for about 6 years, which means that in order to upload, you have to submit a piece of photo ID and a 2257, which is a consent form. So no longer is, Pornhub a platform where it is majority non-consensual content, though it was. But I think I just really wanted to respond to that both inaccurate and disgusting accusation. Thank you.
I think we're going to move on in terms of topics to actually my favorite of all the topics, which is porn in society, mostly because I get to say the title of the next section. Male loneliness, addiction and online culture, pay pigs, gooners, and sissy subs. None of these words are in the Bible. So there's growing concern about male loneliness, isolation, online subcultures, and there's disagreement about how pornography fits into that picture. Research suggests that young men are spending more time alone, having fewer romantic relationships, and increasingly turning to digital spaces for connection and stimulation. Whether pornography is a cause, a symptom, or simply a coping mechanism in that landscape is genuinely contested. So this question is for Noelle. Using Google Ngrams, we did a little research here, we can establish that formerly niche porn-associated terms, let's have our next slide. This is bratty sub over time. Next one. This is cucks. I have to note here, I was reading Twitter just before I came here, and I saw that an 82-year-old African-American state senator from Virginia told her colleagues to get out of the cuck chair recently. I can't think of a better example of porn vocabulary infiltrating into society. We're at the 82-year-old grandmother state senator category of infiltration. Next one is MILF. Anything else? Oh, pay pig, my favorite. So these terms are all exploding in usage in the last few years. There's a broadly felt sense that pornography, I don't think I'm alone in thinking this, that pornography is sort of bleeding into the public psyche across many dimensions. So we're going to address that. One, is it valid, in your opinion, Noelle, for the public to be concerned that porn may be actively changing individual sexual preferences? And two, given that we've seen these terms bleed into the social and cultural discourse, many people just dislike this. They think it's, untoward. Is that legitimate? Is that gut feeling that people have legitimate or illegitimate? And is there any appropriate means by which it can be addressed in law?
This is really interesting because these are porn terms, but they're also all terms of submission, which I think is actually kind of more compelling than just like them being porn terms. I do think that there is like a huge influx in quote unquote porn terminology, but I would say that that's, more interesting when looked at alongside the rise in incel terminology, and kind of these like very niche male spaces coming into the mainstream. Things like mogged, obviously like claviculars, whole deal is like huge for that. And I think that is generally interesting for many reasons. I think that this kind of interest in submission from men makes sense to me personally. I think that men have really internalized a lot of sexual confusion. I've written about this. I think that obviously the Me Too movement was really significant in talking about sex and violence, but we didn't really do anything with it. And in my own research, I know men feel quite scared of sex, scared of being, a perpetrator. And so just anecdotally, I'm not totally surprised that that's manifesting in an interest in, sexual submission or a woman taking on a more dominant role or even like a motherly role. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I recently completed a project that's coming out soon, sort of like a mini documentary about gooning and gooners. And I found it really interesting because I was put on an assignment that was definitely slated to be about male loneliness and about gooning as this really isolatory practice. And I talked to a lot of the guys, off Reddit, etc., met up with them. They were really nice to me, very patient. And it is such a surprisingly social group. They know each other. They're usually sexually performing for each other on the subreddits and the discords. It's very kind of them filming themselves, encouraging each other, and they do a lot of meetups. This is sort of notorious, but they meet up with each other, they get in a room and they jerk it, and it's actually strangely beautiful. And I think that it is something where, I talked to one guy who was saying how so many of the guys that he knows in the subreddit have like gooner besties, and how he like really hopes to have a gooner and I'm like, I believe in you. And a lot of these men are sexually uncomfortable with the idea of entering into the sexual marketplace, of their role in it, and I think that absolutely has to do with the male loneliness epidemic. I think that we are so tremendously isolated from each other, and I'm absolutely willing to believe that pornography, has something to do with that for sure. Like, I think that people are leaning on porn. However, I think that it's so much more complicated than we give it credit for, and something like gooning, which is, held to the standard of being like, almost like a boogeyman of male loneliness, actually is fairly beautiful in how human connection finds a way.
Meghan, do you have a response?
I mean, I do think that it's very interesting that there's more porn than ever before, that young people are watching porn from the time they're very young, that they're being exposed to sex and sexuality at every turn. Again, it's completely unavoidable, and yet the young generations are having less sex than ever before. They're not dating. They're not hanging out. I don't find it strangely beautiful that these young boys who should be out trying to have sex with women, they're young women their own age, are instead jacking off to pornography either alone or in rooms with one another, and that they're uncomfortable with sex. I mean, this is like a time when you're supposed to be exploring and socializing and learning about sex and sexuality and learning about, you know, like how to talk to girls or how to talk to boys or whatever. And instead, they're totally isolated and they're getting more and more lonely, more and more bitter, more and more resentful, more and more frustrated with one another. I mean, you can see it online within all of this discourse around the manosphere and pornography, male-female relationships. I mean, young women and young men have such negative views of one another, and it's because they're not interacting. Like, males and females are not bad. Like, we shouldn't resent each other this much, and we shouldn't feel so negatively about one another. And I don't, and I think it's because I grew up as a teenager in the 90s, like interacting with boys and girls and making out. And, you know, like the first time that my generation had sex, most of us hadn't seen pornography anymore. You're just learning about things in a normal way. And my generation, Gen X, we're all having very satisfying sex lives. And the younger generations are not. And I think that that's like revealing and worth paying attention to. Like, I think it's actually very clear that pornography is having a negative impact on people's relationships and sexualities and happiness in general and mental health.
All right, we're gonna move on to our last moderator question before we open the floor to you guys. This one's about porn's future and AI. So one of the most significant shifts in pornography's future is actually the elimination of human entirely. AI-generated pornography now allows users to specify what they watch, from their race, to body type, to setting, lighting, emotional register, to people who probably don't exist or do exist, and that's where we get into the hairy territory. Noelle, from my understanding, you were once optimistic about AI porn, but now have recently expressed some reservations. Do you mind explaining your position on AI?
Yeah, so a while ago, 5 years ago, I guess, I made AI porn, kind of, using a generative adversarial system that, you know, the type that was available in 2021, which means that nothing it produced looked like anything. And I trained it, as you'd had to back then, for, you know, dozens of hours off of hundreds of stills of pornography that I collected. And I ended up sort of accidentally making something that didn't look like pornography at all. It didn't look like a body, but it was really, really good at triggering Google's nudity sensors, like tremendously good at it. Like, and you get, when you use Google's like nudity API, it gives you like a percentage that it's sure that this is nudity, and it was clocking like 99.997. And compared to a Bella Danger's full asshole, which clocked at like 72%. And so I was using it as part of a lecture series I was doing on the difficulty of moderating pornography and moderating sexual content, because it is like this idea of obscenity is one that is emotional. And at the time, I thought that this was kind of cool, and that AI porn maybe could be used for people to explore, you know, desire, fantasy, etc., in sort of like a controlled space where they would not necessarily have to involve another person. This was, again, 5 years ago. I no longer believe this. Now, a huge amount of my work is talking against AI pornography. I'm very against AI porn. I do not think that there is any use of AI porn that is positive. I think it's sort of not only an affront to labor and labor practices, if we're talking about it from an industry standpoint, but it's also kind of an affront to human desire. I think that it is like this concept that porn is inherently dehumanizing is really interesting. I think that maybe speaks more to the type of porn you've watched, Meghan, which seems like not very much. Sure, but it's difficult to speak accurately to something that you haven't consumed a lot of. And I've consumed a lot of porn, as Meghan has been kind enough to point out. And I think that pornography as a medium of expression can be really genuinely so beautiful and strange. Recently I was at something called SizeCon in Portland, and it is a convention for people who have fetishes where they are running away from a 500-foot woman. And it's awesome. And it was really something that originally struck me because a lot of the pornography that is related to this actually very popular fetish contains no nudity, but it is absolutely pornography. Again, there's an entire convention for it. And I think that is something that speaks to such a strange element of human sexuality that I think is quite beautiful, which is that it's weird as hell. I think everybody is weird as hell about sex. And I think that we need to give ourselves a little bit of room to believe that that's okay. And when we start interacting with AI, when we lose touch of that actually human element of somebody is making something that you think is hot, I think that we're really losing something beautiful and fundamental there.
One image. It's like a Fellini movie. It's gigantic women chasing men. Chaste, very chaste. There's another spin that we could take on the same question. I was actually pretty interested in the fact that you are opposed to AI porn, Noelle. From another perspective, Meghan, AI porn could be a great improvement. It's often presented as a way to reduce harm by removing the need for real women's participation in production. That could potentially limit exploitation and coercion tied to the industry. Users would no longer be dependent on existing systems that could involve trafficking or unequal power dynamics. So as a feminist, from your perspective, do you think that AI porn is leading us to a better place or a worse place, and why?
First of all, I just want to say that I don't think that in order to have a criticism of pornography and the sex industry as a whole, you need to have consumed lots and lots of pornography, just as I don't think that, to be critical of rape, you need to have been raped a lot or to have done a lot of raping. To understand that crimes are wrong, you have to have committed a lot of crimes. To understand that murder is bad, you have to have done a lot of murdering. I think that's a poor argument. But I mean, what I do think that is interesting about this argument around AI porn is that, all these people who were saying that, all pornography is not exploitative or abusive or harmful, that's just this like niche area of the porn industry, are now saying, oh, well, now we can eliminate all of this exploitative, harmful, abusive stuff via AI porn. So I think that there's an admission there. I don't think that it'll help. I think that it'll contribute to isolation, loneliness, a lack of socialization. I think it'll make the problems that young men are having now even worse in terms of their mental health and, again, the loneliness, socialization, interaction, relationships. I don't think that it'll improve anyone's sex lives. I don't think that it's good for sexuality, just as I think that pornography isn't good for sex and sexuality. So no, I don't see it as helpful, and I don't buy that it'll in any way eliminate sex trafficking. I think that it'll just be part of this larger industry of prostitution, pornography, sex trafficking, and exploitation, and fuel the desire for that kind of content.
So we have agreement actually that both of you dislike AI porn.
I don't think it's good.
Agreement. Woo! All right, so that is ending Anthony and my time, but we want to open the floor to audience questions, and I'm hoping that this can extend further than this. Who wants to go? You want to go first? That's an easy one.
Hi. This is my question is kind of a way to like rectify the beginning question that this debate started in, which I'm not sure if y'all raised in good faith or as a way to sort of create inflammatory arguments. But this question of is porn a net good or net bad for society, I think is just a complete misdirection of the porn discussion in general. I think it's much more interesting to talk about what that sort of a moralistic, paternalistic question than manifests as in legislation, and that's sort of like where we keep falling short of in this conversation here is like, I think a more productive question than is porn a net good or net bad for society, which kind of reminds me of like, is rap a net good or a net bad for society? And I think Noelle touched on this point about like respectability politics, how that question is just kind of misguided in talking about, you know, what does actually legislating about sex, like over sex work and sexual media look like. And so my question is basically like, maybe instead of asking the first question we did, it's should we ban sex workers? How should we ban or regulate sex work? And how have you seen that manifest actually?
I think that you touched on your kind of practical stance on things.
Well, I mean, I actually do think that the premise of the debate is a good premise. I mean, that's what I'm interested in talking about. As I said before, I don't think it's really possible to ban pornography or ban. It's just not a realistic debate to have. I think that it's really important to talk about the harms of pornography and how it impacts people in terms of their mental health and their relationships and their view of the opposite sex, their view of, sex and sexuality, their view of themselves and their bodies. You know, we can see how pornification and porn culture has impacted young women in harmful ways. Young women, and, you know, the fact that it's been normalized that young women are supposed to be putting, you know, thoughty photos out on Instagram and whatever. You know, this isn't making these women feel more confident. It's making them feel worse about themselves. You know, women are self-conscious and insecure, and they feel worse about their bodies and faces more than ever. And I think that's in part due to the fact that they're seeking validation from strange men on the internet, and that's not how you build confidence. So, yeah, I mean, I think that porn is a net harm for society, and I do think that's an important thing to talk about. And in terms of legislation, I think that one way to go about it, again, is to apply the Nordic model to the sex trade, and try to curb consumption and try to make it more difficult to profit, essentially, and to prevent trafficking, exploitation, rape, underage videos, etc.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think what's frustrating is that I do agree in that I think it's useful to explore practically what we're talking about and what we want, because I think that we can both agree that, you know, women, for example, we agree that women joining OnlyFans at 18 is bad. I think that we can agree with that. But how we choose to kind of put that ideology forward in terms of advocating for legislative change, I think is very different. And I think that is where we fundamentally diverge. And I think that another fundamental difference that we have is the idea that, obviously, as you said, pornography is inherently exploitative. And I think that that's so frustrating.
Well,
also
inherently unethical, I would say unethical.
Okay. Sure. I think that part of why that frustrates me is because it actually makes it more difficult to create change in the industry. And I'm going to talk to you about why. Because when we allow pornography to be, as you said, non-consensual, for example, like my personal definition of pornography, and I think that this is important to maintain, is a consensually created entertainment product. I'm saying that as somebody who has made a lot of porn, who has had, various roles within the adult industry, who has publicly quit some of those roles, who has been critical of the industry in some ways, but generally supportive. That is my definition of pornography. It has to be ethical by those standards of everybody is consenting to a product made that is an entertainment product. That's what porn is. Because, for example, sex. When we talk about sex, we don't use the terminology non-consensual sex. That doesn't exist. That's rape. If sex is not consensual, it is rape. We have to maintain that because sex should never be non-consensual. Those should be two different things. It's important for us to maintain that so we can have a productive conversation about it. Similarly, there is terminology for what you're describing, which is human trafficking, it's image-based sexual abuse material, it's child sexual exploitation material, CSAM, sexual abuse material. For the term child porn has recently, in the past few years, been banned from most legislative documents because there's no such thing as child porn. There can never be such thing as child porn because pornography should be an entertainment product, and legislatively speaking, that is child sexual abuse material. It is evidence of a crime. It is not an entertainment product. I believe that an entertainment product can and does exist. I have given many examples of it tonight. I am sure many of you have seen examples yourselves. I know that you hate how much pornography I've watched, but it has given me a window into such a beautiful expression of what pornography can and should be. And it is important that we maintain that because the evil stuff that you are describing, the human trafficking, the child sexual abuse material, the image-based sexual assault material, we should be able to handle that on a legislative level. There is a reason why we don't use the term child porn anymore. There's a reason why we don't use the term revenge porn anymore, because pornography needs to be kept sacred so we can have an understanding of ethics. And I think that this is, complicated when I think that you have such a narrow understanding of porn. As you said, and you're kind of widely applying it to everybody knows what porn is. I don't think that that's true. I don't think you know what porn is for me.
I mean, most prostitution that exists in the sex trade is sex trafficking. Most of the pornography and prostitution that exists globally is non-consensual. It's women being abused, children being abused.
I need you to
and there's
cite
never
sources.
been a sex trade that has existed without that kind of exploitation, that sexual abuse, that trafficking. You can pretend that's not what you've seen, but considering how much pornography you've watched, again, I know that you're aware that this exists because you know what existed on platforms like Pornhub. So I don't know. I mean, we can have this fantasy conversation about what could exist or what might be, but it's not what exists. And we have to talk about the reality of the industry as it stands.
We are talking about what exists. I'm talking about what exists. I've given so many examples of what exists. And I'm saying that your stance of, criminalizing people selling, again, what
That's
your stance is.
That's not what my stance is, though.
Babe.
Can we go on to one last audience question, maybe one or two?
Okay, you guys have to come up front. Okay, Caitlin.
Okay, I have a question for both of you. But clearly to you, it seems that consent is very important when it comes to pornography. And I think when we talk about consent, it can be given and revoked at any time. So when we're talking about pornography and you can give consent at one time, what does revoking it look like when it is forever on the internet?
I think that's a great question. I think that there's so much actually going on with that that's really interesting, where I think that the one benefit of OnlyFans and the benefit of the OnlyFans model is that it allows performers to have ownership over their content, whereas, you know, if you're working with a studio, it's similar to, you know, shooting a commercial, where if you're an actor shooting a commercial, you don't have ownership over that commercial. If you shoot a commercial for KFC and 3 years later you're a vegan, you can't be like, hey, can you take that commercial down? That's not really done. It's similar in studio porn, and obviously that's an issue because the stakes of pornography are much higher. There's so much more shame around porn. It can be difficult to get work if it's easy to find pornography of you online, et cetera, et cetera. The stakes are higher. And so one thing that OnlyFans did is make it so that these platforms where individuals are selling content, it made it much more normal that they have ownership over that content. And that's great. I mean, now Pornhub is fully verified and it's similar. So, you know, people have the option to work with studios if they want, but they can have entire careers that are not based on the studio model, and they can take down their content. There are a lot of services that exist, DMCAs, fingerprinting, et cetera, that work to remove whatever people want online after they've taken things down. I think that it is sort of this idea of like, I'm never going to defend people, you know, re-uploading non-consensual content, pirated content. I've never been in support of that, and I think that this kind of idea that, again, like, pornography is inherently about this sort of like exploitation and this expectation that, you know, one day you will want this all scrubbed, does have a moralistic leaning. But it is, like, I mean, it is like a huge issue, and it's a huge issue in porn, and I think that there are, again, many services that are kind of like working to fix that, but I don't think that people should never be allowed to upload nude photos or videos of themselves because conceptually they might want to take them down. Like, I think that I'm not willing to go there with that.
Meghan, I imagine you want to respond to that, but I actually have a curveball question for you, and then I want to go into closing statements.
Okay.
You threw a curveball at us when you said that you don't care about gay porn. Could you, not too long, but could you briefly expand upon your position on gay porn?
I
Is
mean,
that
I don't
safe for
have
consumption?
I don't have a position on gay porn per se. I mean, you know, what I mean is that all of my work for the past 15 years around prostitution and pornography and the sex trade has focused on the pornography that men primarily consume of women and girls. So when people bring up, you know, like, what about gay porn? You know, like, I mean, no, I don't think that any porn is good per se, but it hasn't been my primary focus. So that's what I meant by that. I do just want to quickly say, in response to the question, that I think we hear all the time from women who are talking about their experiences in pornography that this is a thing that happens to them over and over and over again, where they're filming a video and then something starts to happen that makes them uncomfortable, that's painful, that's abusive, whatever, and it's next to impossible for them to stop the process once they're in it, because, you know, people are being paid to film, you know, that they've paid for this apartment, this studio space, whatever. And there's so much pressure that it becomes, again, almost impossible for them to revoke consent. So that's just another aspect of this consent conversation that is under-addressed or underappreciated, understood. You know, just because you sign a contract saying, yes, I agree to participate in this, fine. It doesn't mean that everything that happens after the fact is consensual or that these girls and women are okay with it. And again, you know, like they can't get it off the internet once it's out there, and that's a really big deal. We cannot talk about it, but it's true. You don't know what circumstances under which these girls and women consented, how these videos got out there, and how they're going to feel about it a year down the line, 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, and most of them don't feel good about it.
I have a response to that.
Wait, before you respond, we're getting some feedback. I'm afraid of losing the audience, but we're getting some feedback via instantaneous channels that people want more questions. I don't know how you guys feel. I want to do a pulse check with people. Are we ready for closing statements, or do we want to extend this section longer?
I do need to respond.
But you'll get your response, but I'm just asking. Wait. By hands, how many for more questions? By hands, how many for closing statements?
Wow, it's pretty split.
One more question. But first, you can respond.
I think that you keep saying really broad things that aren't rooted in anything, but I think maybe your own conversations and people, you know, saying that most people regret doing porn is a huge overstatement. What study are you referencing? What?
I mean, you hear it, if you listen to any woman who talks about her experience in pornography.
That's not true.
That's what they'll say.
that's like.
I've
so
talked to countless women
true.
in the sex trade. I've talked to countless women who've left the sex trade. You know, the things that you are willing to do and the things that you do again when you're 18 are not the things that you would do when you were 30. And pornography is a really serious thing to do. It's not like, oh, I got, too drunk and did something embarrassing. It's like your most intimate parts on the internet and possibly you being abused or possibly raped. Like, it's a really horrific thing to have out there online for the rest of your life.
I mean, this is kind of, you're proving my point, unfortunately, but I think it is just like it's frustrating because this rhetoric of all pornography being evil and bad becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy because it creates room that allows pornography to be evil and bad, and it gives space for that, and it makes it acceptable for that to be evil and bad, and I don't think that that's appropriate. I think that, as you said yourself, it's impossible to truly regulate pornography. I agree with that. Pornography has always been around. People have always been consuming pornography in one way or another. And I think that it is absurd to try to paint all of it with the same brush as you continue to do. Because also it prevents us from taking a real look at pornography and interacting with it in a way that's actually productive.
All right, we have one more question. This is so hard. They will be available to ask questions, so I'm going to give it to you.
So I think you guys are just kind of at a point where you're painting the industry of pornography as one thing, you're painting it as another. Can either of you just tell me, like, percentage-wise, if you know, nationally or globally or whatever,
Yeah, I don't know what the statistics are. I mean, and I don't really know how you would quantify that, because that's not, like, I mean, who's in India, like, collecting data on trafficked women and children who are being filmed, and that's, you know, ending up on the internet. Didn't you say it's all of it? No, I didn't say that it was all of it.
You did say it was all of it.
That all of it was trafficking?
Exploitation or trafficking or...
No, I
The
didn't say
the
that. I said the
majority of
vast
women-
majority of what happens in the sex industry is trafficking, abusive, and exploitation.
Okay,
That
the
includes
vast
prostitution
majority.
and pornography, for sure. Yeah.
So you think 80%? Somebody asked.
I don't have a percentage, so I'm not going to offer
Okay.
something that I don't
Can
know.
I, just as a clarification, are you saying that greater than 50% is
Trafficking? Like,
For instance,
the
like
sex
one-
industry as a whole? Yeah,
No.
most of it is trafficking. Like, most
okay.
prostitution is trafficking.
But is that based on a statistic that you have, or are you guessing?
No, I mean, I don't have a statistic, but honestly, like, if you look it up, that's what you'll find. This is, like, not uncommon knowledge at all. That globally, the sex trade is mostly consisting of sex trafficking of women and children.
Okay. I was a peer reviewer on probably the most comprehensive data collection on statistics around pornography that currently exists. And generally speaking, what was found is that there is a hugely frustrating lack of data around this. Hugely frustrating. There exists so little information about porn, largely because the stigma around pornography creates circumstances where institutions are not willing to touch it with a 10-foot pole, which is exactly what I'm talking about. This moralistic grandstanding around porn creates the circumstances that does not allow us to critically look at consumption and regulation, genuinely speaking. And it just, again, practically, this is like kind of exactly the problem, where there is so much stigma around porn, there is so much shame around porn that I know that you agree with. But
I don't think there is a lot of stigma around pornography. I think it's become totally normalized and acceptable and mainstreamed.
From a statistics perspective, from a research perspective, that's not true. Actually, more young men than ever before, and you'll be happy to hear this, more young men than ever before support controlling restrictions around pornography. For example, there's actually increasing stigma around porn, statistically speaking, and I can
Like
share
for
those
minors
with you.
using pornography.
No, young men, 18 to 24.
So there's increasing stigma around young men using pornography, but they're also getting together in rooms and masturbating together to pornography, and this is like strangely beautiful.
This is again, like, you're just rejecting all information.
This
And
is
it's
information
really
that you
frustrating.
provided. I mean, pornography is everywhere. We see it all the time.
I
and
know.
we're told that it's totally normal and harmless. Most men use pornography. I don't think the shame is working. The stigma's not there.
Okay. That's not true. And institutionally, that's not true. Institutionally, I really would love more information on pornography because I obviously care about it.
All right, so that is the this is not working. Can I use that? All right, that concludes the audience questions. We are going to move forward with closing statements. Noelle, we started with you, so I'm going to start with Meghan first. You have 5 minutes for your closing argument.
I will say briefly this time that I think that the conversation around pornography really shouldn't be limited just to legalities. I think, again, it's really important to talk about how pornography impacts us as individuals, how it impacts relationships, how it impacts sex and sexuality. And so I actually think that having these kinds of conversations outside these binaries of consent, non-consent, legal, illegal, ban, not ban, is really important. And I think that they do work. And I think that actually we are seeing this growing but small movement of younger men deciding voluntarily to quit porn and stop using porn because they can see that it's negatively impacting their sex lives and relationships and dicks. And and I think that's actually entirely disconnected from a conversation around consent and legalities, but just in terms of a, mental health, personal growth perspective. And I really can't think of any argument that would say that pornography is a good thing as a whole for society. I think that if we're talking about net good and net harm, we again have to look at what is really happening in the sex trade globally, like what's really happening to millions of women and millions of children in the sex trade, which is fucking horrific. So fine, if there's going to be some voluntary so-called sex work, if there's going to be some women who really, really, really want to film themselves doing sex acts, who really want to sell sex voluntarily, they can do that. That's mostly not what's happening. That's why trafficking exists, because the voluntary women, the women who really want to do it, there's just not enough of them to fill the demand. And that's why women and girls and children in general are exploited and forced and trafficked and abused. So yeah, again, we can have this fantasy conversation about what's not happening. That's not the reality of most of the sex trade. And I think that it's disingenuous to pretend otherwise.
Noelle?
I think that the idea of my argument being based in fantasy is a little bit ironic, since I am the only person referencing actual study. But yeah, let's talk about fantasy. I think that, again, painting all of pornography with this brush, the vast majority of pornography with this brush, practically speaking, not based in fantasy, based in actual reality. We see what it does. This is not a new conversation, it's happening. And I keep referencing legislation because that is how we see it be practically applied. I'm still pretty confused on what your plan is, to be honest. The Nordic model would criminalize people consuming porn, but you want to criminalize people making money off porn. The majority of people making money off porn are independent contractors, meaning the people who want to sell porn, so it would be criminalizing them. And this is what I'm talking about. This is rooted in reality. How do we actually move forward? And there are a couple of studies. I also agree with you that the idea of banning pornography is ridiculous. There is going to be pornography. It is impossible to define pornography. I know you feel very confident doing it, but again, I've watched enough porn to know it's a wild world out there, and people like to watch a lot of stuff that to them is pornography, that they're selling as porn, that they're making as porn, that they're watching as porn. But I think that these criticisms of, for example, sexual violence, I'm not interested in dismissing them. I'm not interested in dismissing, the realities that women feel like their only option is OnlyFans. I think that that's horrible. But I don't think that that is due to porn, and I think that this is our fundamental difference. There are a couple studies that I'd like to reference. For example, links to perceived pornography realism with sexual aggression, which is a study from a couple years ago, a German study that put people into two camps, and found that the single most kind of significant factor in people's relationship to porn was the knowledge that it wasn't real. So that suggests that the attempt to sort of brush porn under the rug is actually preventing us from having real conversations and education around pornography, and that is creating, very similar to the statistics issue, this moralization around porn, this fear around porn, is creating circumstances where people are struggling to respond to it. And the best thing to do to move forward is not to ban pornography, which, as you yourself said, is kind of impossible, but to actually educate around it, to remove that stigma around pornography consumption that you seem to think doesn't exist, although you are actively shaming me for porn in this very debate, for watching porn. But removing the shame and stigma allows us to have actual conversations about pornography as education. This is actually good. Is your blog title Same Drugs based off Fight the New Drug? No, okay. Fight the New Drug is an anti-porn website that published an article that they titled "Qualitative Study Shows Porn's Role in Normalizing Coercive Anal Sex." Very similar to your argument. However, the study that they cited, anal heterosex among young people and implications for health promotion, it was so interesting because reading the entire study, the initial brief of the study says that young men reference pornography in engaging in risky anal sex with their partners. The entirety of the study, if they had only paid $3.99 to access it, actually showed that relationships between young men were influencing each other to engage in risky behavior, and pornography was actually not much of a factor whatsoever. And the study recommended that education around pornography was, and around sex largely, was the route to these men having a better relationship to sex. Relatedly, right now there's a swath of people and educators being deleted off of pretty much every platform, sex educators being deleted off every platform because their content is being labeled as pornography and pornographic.
Thank you both. Round of applause to both. All right, you guys, if this works, we're gonna do another poll. Hopefully the internet is in my favor. 1 second. All right, let me activate. Please work, okay. All right, you guys, please scan the QR code.
1 minute.
Wow, pretty diversified.
Do you want to take a picture of this? I saw you take a picture of the first one.
You've got 20 more seconds. Anyone lingering?
I think
All
it's
right.
done.
So this is our final results.
Our final results, and this is our initial results.
So it looks like we've significantly evened out the distribution. Everyone is now more confused than
Well, I think that we have really no exact, I guess number 4 is 25%, but barely. We're pretty evenly distributed. We've become less puritanical.
Thanks, guys. I'll take that as a fucking win. Can you send me this?
Yeah, we'll send you this.
Thank you.
All right, you guys, so that concludes. Everyone give a round of applause to Meghan and Noelle for making the time here. Thank you so much. You guys are